Should you be dialing your wind? Well, the short answer is yes, but if you clicked on this video, you're probably wanting to know why, or at least maybe some of the details behind why that answer is what I say it is. What do I mean by dialing wind? A lot of people are familiar with dialing elevation, but the turrets on these scopes also have the ability to dial on the side, which changes your windage. And if you have scopes here like this Leupold Mark IV, it actually makes it really easy because it has a locking feature that comes back to your zero where you had originally zeroed your scope. The alternative to that is holding wind. Much like you would hold over for elevation for further shots, if you have more wind, you might need to hold further into the wind to account for the bullet being blown back to where you're actually aiming at. To some people, sometimes that looks like you are not even aiming at the target. Why are you aiming at the dirt or things like that? And actually you're trying to hit the target because you know there's some wind and you're holding for wind. A lot of the modern ballistic solvers give you solutions for exactly how far to move or to hold or to dial so that you have the best chance of actually hitting your target. But windage is one of those things that shooters talk about probably the most out of everything I've seen when it comes to doing a competition or hunting or you name it. What are we going to do for our wind? The reason for that is wind can be a little bit difficult to get really good inputs for. Elevation depends mostly on your velocity and the distance and how fast that bullet's going to get there. Overall, those are typically easier than windage. Wind really doesn't have a whole lot of input. It's speed and direction, but then you start to account for some of the terrain features and how good are you exactly at knowing that this was a 3-mile-an-hour wind versus a 5-mile-an-hour wind, because those can have pretty dramatic differences in your results. Or even the direction. Was it a 3 o'clock wind or was it a 4 o'clock wind? And is that going to change your results? That might not change it as much as comparing a 12 o'clock wind and a 1 o'clock wind. Those may have a lot bigger of a difference on your results than a 3 and a 4 o'clock. So being able to have those inputs really good really changes our results. What's going to give us that highest probability of hitting exactly what we're aiming at? So, since a lot of us are putting those inputs in and we're trusting what we're getting from it, and then we go and we try to apply these solutions from our ballistic solvers into the actual shooting application, we tend to find that maybe we have to make some corrections, but we start to get a pretty good feel on what that is. But the way in which we determine what that feel really is can have some different preferences, I guess you'd say, that people like. One of the most dominant ones that I've seen is that people like to hold for their wind. Just like if you were doing a holdover for elevation, they hold to the side, left or right, for their windage. I think some of that stems from people not liking to adjust their zero because they spend so much time getting a good zero point that they don't want to do anything that would jeopardize messing that up. So this is what that looks like. Here an 800-yard target. It really looks like you're aiming over in the dirt, but the windage marks there to the right of the center point of that reticle are what the shooter's looking at to know where they're actually aiming and trying to hit. So maybe they're holding a 1/2 mil to the left, accounting for the wind to bring them back on to target. Another big one here is moving targets. Man, we could do a whole episode just on moving targets, and I myself could probably use some finer details on making myself a better shooter at moving targets. But the point is that if you add wind into a moving target, you've now changed your lead on both directions. Because usually the moving targets in competition setting, they are going back and forth in some manner. So if you have wind from the left and it's coming to the right, that's going to be a different wind hold than when that moving target starts coming back to the right. So even if there was no wind and you needed 1.5 mils of lead for that moving target, your windage value may take 2/10 of wind at that distance. So now you have a 1.3 and a 1.7, and it's hard for us to wrap our minds around. As opposed to dial in 2/10 of wind, now it's shrunk that back to your 1.5 mils, and all you have to think about is that exact 1.5 mils, know 1.3 and 1.7, which direction am I going? Do I need to lead further this direction? And then we get more confusing things thrown in. Just take some of that thinking out of it. Another situation might be holdovers. So if you have a stage where you're trying to go a little quicker and you don't really want to dial, you can go ahead and dial in your wind, and it will help you with the holdovers because you're going to have different distances. If you have a Christmas tree type of reticle where you can have some of the windage marks going out, that helps offset some of that error. But not everybody has that, or maybe your holdovers aren't going to line up very well with those windage holds within that Christmas tree on the bottom of the reticle. So what you could do is dial in your wind, and now you've got your perfect holdovers back and forth. This is what that may look like. If you have 2 or 3 tenths dialed in here at this close 400-yard target, then your 500-yard target is going to be pretty similar, maybe similar enough that you actually don't have another wind hold, or that wind hold's going to be pretty similar. When I move from one to the next, that wind hold is essentially the same, and we're going to move quickly and get impacts, only focusing on the center line, so where our holdovers are, without having to adjust left and right. And maybe it comes down to fast stages where you're trying to go quickly. Maybe there's not a whole lot of holdover. Maybe you are dialing a little bit. So like in this situation, for example, you're spanning across the range to different targets, and they have a little bit of a different distance, but not having to then stop and take the extra time besides finding where that target is and what your elevation is. You can go straight on hold and get a good impact for that particular target. I've been hearing you say this since before I even pressed record here. Yes, there are exceptions to this. What are those exceptions? There's 2 big ones that come to my mind. One would be if you have alternative wind directions for 2 different targets. So for instance, if you're having to span 120 degrees across the direction of fire that you're looking at, between those you have your wind coming straight at you. So if I'm over here aiming at this target, my wind is coming left to right, so I'm going to have a left to right wind. Now if I span 120 degrees, now my wind is coming right to left. I have a right to left hold. Now if you're dialing in wind for one or the other, that's going to be harder to do because you've essentially now doubled the wind hold coming to the alternative direction. So maybe the better situation there is to leave your wind hold on your zero where you zeroed it originally, and then just hold when you go right versus left. The other issue deals with uncertainty in header or tailwind. Now, a lot of times with head or tail winds, you just got this little bit of variation that can really throw your results different ways. So an 1130 versus a 1230 wind, that can have dramatically different results on what you should actually be doing. Kind of similar to the 120, 1130 versus 1230, but this wind's coming at you like this. What are you actually going to do? So maybe our better action there is to leave it dialed to our 0 point and just shoot at what we think is best and make adjustments along the way. But overall, what the dialing wind really does for us is that it helps us to remove some of that extra thinking so that we can really focus on what we need to actually be doing to get the most points or take down whatever it is that we're trying to do with our shooting disciplines. I mean, we can sit here and argue and theorize or anything about that. What I want to encourage you to do is, if you're not doing it, try it. If you're only doing that, try holding. Let's put some more tools in our tool belt, and let's make us better shooters.